A golden light tears through the steam of a fresh Titan kill, and it isn't a nape wound cauterizing shut. It's a man, standing where a 15-meter Titan should be dying, untouched, unbothered, staring at his own hands like he doesn't recognize this world any more than it recognizes him. The Garrison just lost Wall Maria. They do not have room in their heads for a second miracle, or a second monster. His name is Broly, and the soldiers hunting him have no idea that the only thing keeping this monster from ending them all is that nobody's given him a reason to yet. This is what if Broly landed in Attack on Titan, and only on Multiverse Saiyan do crossovers hit like this. Writer Stephen Jari's back with another one. Drop your next what if in the comments. We read every single one. Smash that subscribe, ring the bell, and buckle up. This is about to get heavy. The steam came first. Ilsa Braun smelled it before she saw it. That thick, meaty stink of a fresh Titan kill, sweet and wrong, curling up over the rooftops of what used to be the Outer Maria district. She'd smelled it a dozen times in the last 3 days. It should have meant relief. One less Titan clawing through the rubble toward the refugee columns still filing east. It didn't smell like relief this time. It smelled like something had gone wrong in a new way. She banked hard on her ODM cables, gas hissing thin behind her, and dropped between two half-collapsed rooftops into the haze. Below her, Garrison stragglers were already gathering at the mouth of a shattered market street, weapons half raised, nobody quite willing to be the first one to walk forward. She saw why. A 15-meter class was down. Not killed clean, killed wrong. Its nape wasn't sliced through with the tight, practiced cut of a soldier's blade. It looked like something had simply stopped the Titan's arm mid-swing, and then it had come apart, folding backward at angles a body, even a Titan's body, had no business folding. Steam poured off the wreckage in sheets, hissing against the cooling evening air, and underneath all of it, standing untouched in the crater the Titan's fall had punched into the cobblestones, was a man. He was not doing anything. That was the strangest part. He wasn't fighting, wasn't fleeing, wasn't looking for the next target the way every soldier in this district had been trained since childhood to expect from anything that size. He was just standing there, chest rising and falling, staring down at his own hand like he'd never seen it hold that much power before and wasn't sure he liked it. He had to be 7 feet tall even like this. Calm, powered down, whatever down meant for something built like that. Torn dark trousers, a ragged green sash, no shirt across a chest, and shoulders that looked less like a man's and more like something carved to survive falling buildings. Wild black-green hair hung around a face that, from this distance, looked almost gentle, almost lost. "Report," Commander Dreist's voice crackled low behind her, and Ilsa realized she'd frozen on the rooftop, boots skidding slightly on broken tile. "Sir, you need to see this." Dreist arrived at a dead run, coat flapping, 3 more Garrison soldiers fanning out behind him, with crossbows leveled at a target none of them had a name for. He stopped at the edge of the crater and looked, for a long moment, entirely unwilling to process what he was seeing. A Titan, dead, not from a nape cut, from something that had simply ended it, and a man standing in the middle of the wreckage who was, near as Dreist's eyes could tell, completely unarmed. "That's not possible," muttered the soldier to his left. A boy named Karst, couldn't be older than 17, hands white-knuckled on his crossbow stock. "Nothing kills a Titan like that without steel. Nothing except..." He didn't finish the sentence. Nobody wanted to say founding Titan out loud in a crater that used to be a marketplace. Dreist raised a hand, and the crossbows steadied, a silent order to hold, not to fire. 3 days ago, Wall Maria had come apart, because someone had made exactly one wrong assumption too fast. He would not make that mistake twice, not even in the face of something this impossible. "You!" Dreist called out, voice pitched to carry, hoarse from 4 days without real sleep. "Identify yourself." The man's head turned. Slowly, Draist watched something shift behind those eyes. Not aggression, not the blank hunger he'd seen in every Titan's stare since this nightmare started. Confusion. Genuine, human confusion on a face that belonged to something the size of a small building. "Where?" the man said, and his voice was low, rough, like it hadn't been used in a while. "Is this?" Nobody answered. Nobody knew how. The man, Draist would learn his name soon enough, would spend that name like a curse for the rest of his life. Looked down at the ruin of the Titan beside him, and something crossed his face that Draist had genuinely never expected to see on anything wearing the shape of a monster. "Regret. I didn't mean to," the man said, quietly, to no one in particular. "It was going to step on someone." Ilsa touched down at the crater's edge, close enough now to see the details the distance had hidden. The faint gold that still flickered at the edges of his hair, like the last embers of a fire someone had just stamped out. The raw, corded muscle of his forearms, and strangest of all, the wristband. A torn, scorched fragment of red fabric circled one wrist, frayed threads hanging loose, like it had once been something whole and precious, and was now just debris, same as everything else in this district. "He's not transforming," she said, low, mostly to herself. Every Titan she'd ever seen, every shifter she'd ever heard whispered about in Garrison briefings, had a tell, a moment where the human shape gave way to something monstrous. This man had simply arrived. Already this size, already this strong. No steam, no lightning, no crystalline hardening around a nape. "Brawn," Drace's voice, tight. "Fall back to the flank line." "Sir, if he wanted us dead." "That's exactly the problem, soldier." Dracis didn't look away from the man in the crater. "We don't know what he wants." The man, Broly, though none of them knew it yet, took a step forward, and every soldier on that line flinched, weapons snapping up in a ragged, undisciplined volley of readiness. He stopped, raised both hands, slow, palms open, in a gesture so plainly universal that even Karst's white-knuckled grip on his crossbow loosened half an inch. "I'm not going to hurt you," Broly said. His eyes swept the crater, the broken market stalls, the smoke-stained sky where Wall Maria's silhouette should have blocked the horizon, and now simply didn't. "I don't know where my brother is. I don't know where anyone is." "Brother," Trieste filed that word away, like a soldier filing away a threat assessment, because in this new world, every scrap of information about an entity capable of one-shotting a 15-meter Titan was a scrap that might keep his remaining people alive. "You're not from here," Draist said. Not a question. Broly's throat worked. "No. Do you know what a Titan is?" A long pause. Broly looked at the ruined nape beside him. Really looked. This time, taking in the sheer wrongness of the thing he'd killed without meaning to. "Not until a minute ago. They didn't take him in chains. There were no chains that would have mattered, and every soldier on that line understood it, even the ones too young to have learned yet how to swallow that kind of fear and keep functioning. Instead, Draist did the only thing 4 days of catastrophe had taught him still worked. He talked. Slow, careful, the tone he'd have used on a spooked horse or a soldier 3 seconds from breaking. "There's a garrison outpost 2 streets east," Draist said. "Still standing, mostly. We're going to walk there. Together, you're going to answer some questions, and I'm going to try very hard not to have you killed before I understand what you are. That sound fair?" Something in Broly's face eased, fractionally, the particular relief of being spoken to like a person instead of a target. "Fair," he echoed. They walked. Ilsa kept pace on the rooftops above, ODM cables coiled and ready, watching the strange procession below. A battered commander, a handful of terrified soldiers, and a giant of a man who kept glancing at the broken wall on the horizon with an expression she was beginning to recognize as grief. He asked, once, quietly, if there'd been anyone inside the wall that fell. Dryst told him the truth. Thousands, and thousands more since. Broly's jaw tightened, gold flickering at the roots of his hair for one bare instant before he visibly, deliberately, breathed it back down. Ilsa filed that away too. He controls it. Whatever it is, he chooses when it comes out. That, more than the dead titan, more than the impossible strength, that was the detail that would keep her up that night. A weapon that powerful, and it had a leash, which meant somewhere out there was a version of this man without one. The outpost was a converted granary, half its roof caved in from the breach, its remaining garrison down to 11 exhausted soldiers and a supply sergeant who nearly fainted when Broly ducked. Actually ducked, folding nearly double, to fit through the door. Dryst sat him down across a cracked table, lit the cigarette he'd been holding unlit for 3 hours, and started asking the questions that mattered. Your name, Broly. Your people, where are they? A pause that told Dryst more than any answer could have. Far, farther than I know how to say. Your abilities. Dryst gestured, vaguely, at all of him. Where does that come from? Broly looked down at his own hands again. That same gesture from the crater. A man still not fully certain these belonged to him. I get angry, he said simply. And then this happens. Karst, posted by the door, made a small, strangled sound. And when you're not angry, Dryst pressed, then I'm just strong. A faint, humorless almost smile. Just very strong. Dryst absorbed that in silence, tapping ash onto the cracked floorboards, doing the math every commander in his position would have done. An asset this powerful was either the greatest weapon the walls had ever possessed, or the fastest way for what remained of humanity to finish the job the colossal titan had started 3 days ago. He didn't know yet which. He wasn't sure Broly did either. There'll be people, Dryst said finally, above my rank, who are going to want to know everything about you. Some of them are going to want to use you. Some of them are going to want you dead before you can be used by someone else. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Broly held his gaze, steady, unbothered by the threat, in a way that made even Dryst's hardened nerves prickle. I've had people try to use me before, he said, quiet. It didn't go well for them. Outside, the last of the evening light was failing over the ruin of Wall Maria, and somewhere in the garrison's radio room, a runner was already sprinting east with a report that would reach the military police by morning. Unknown entity, humanoid, titan-killing capability, currently detained, request immediate instruction. Ilsa Braun stood at the granary's broken window, watching Broly's silhouette against the lamplight, and thought about the flicker of gold she'd seen at the crater, and the grief on his face when he asked about the dead. She did not think, yet, that he was a monster. She was starting to worry that everyone above her rank was about to decide he was one anyway, and that the only thing standing between a frightened, grieving giant and the full weight of the garrison's fear was how long his patience held. The report reached the military police by mid-morning, and by noon, it had already stopped being Dryst's problem. He'd known it would happen. He'd said as much to the boy, to Broly, the night before, and some small, tired part of him had hoped he'd be wrong. He wasn't. A courier arrived at the granary outpost just past noon, mud splattered from the ride, with orders bearing a seal Dryst recognized and hated in equal measure. The military police regiment, signed off by someone high enough up the interior chain that arguing wasn't an option, only a delay. Subject to be remanded to MP custody for assessment. Full military escort required. Non-compliance to be treated as hostile. Dryst read it twice, standing in the granary's cracked doorway with the morning light behind him, and felt something in his chest go cold and flat, the way it always did, right before he had to give an order he didn't believe in. They're sending the police, he said, to no one and everyone. Ilsa, cleaning her blades at the supply table, went still. For assessment, for containment. Dryst folded the paper once, hard, and tucked it inside his coat. Assessment's just the word they put on the form. Across the granary, Broly sat where he'd sat most of the night, too large for the bench, knees folded up near his chest, patient in a way that unnerved every soldier who glanced at him. He hadn't slept, as far as anyone could tell. He'd simply watched the door, and the window, and the slice of gray sky visible through the caved-in roof, with the stillness of something that had learned, somewhere far from here, that stillness was often safer than motion. "They're coming for me," Broly said. Not a question. He'd heard every word. Drace didn't insult him with a denial. "They're coming to decide what you are. Weapon, threat, something in between." He met Broly's eyes, steady. "I won't lie to you about what that usually means, once the decision's made." "And what do you think I am?" It was the first time Broly had asked him anything back, and the directness of it caught Drace off guard. He took a slow breath, tasting stale smoke and granary dust. "I think," Drace said, "you're the first thing I've seen in 4 days that could have flattened this outpost and didn't." He paused. "That buys you exactly 1 conversation's worth of benefit of the doubt from me. It won't buy you anything from the police." The escort arrived at dusk. 6 armored wagons, 40 soldiers in military police blue, and at their head, a woman Dryas knew by reputation and had hoped never to meet in person, Captain Reeve Yalden, MP Interior Division, the kind of officer whose name got attached to reports that ended careers. She didn't dismount so much as arrive, boots striking cobblestone with the precision of someone who'd never once doubted her own authority. Her eyes swept the granary, the ring of exhausted Garrison soldiers, and finally landed on Broly himself, folded up on his bench like a man trying to take up less space than his body allowed. "Commander Dryst." Yalden's voice was crisp, unbothered. "I'll need him restrained for transport." "With what?" Dryst asked, flat. "You bring shackles rated for Titans, Captain." Something flickered across Yalden's face. Not quite doubt, but close enough that Dryst filed it away. She turned to Broly directly, the way one might address a piece of dangerous machinery rather than a person. "You'll walk to the wagon. You won't resist. Understood?" Broly looked at her for a long moment, not with menace, Dryst noted, but with the same weary patience he'd shown all night. "I understand you're scared," Broly said quietly. "That's not the same as understanding me." Yalden's jaw tightened. "Walk to the wagon." He walked, unhurried, calm, folding himself through the granary door with the same careful precision he'd used the night before. 40 crossbows and a captain's cold authority trained on him the entire way, and Ilsa, watching from the rooftop line where Dryast had posted her, felt something twist in her chest at the sight. He could have ended every soldier in that yard in the time it took her to blink. He didn't. He climbed into a reinforced wagon built for a purpose no engineer had ever designed it for, and let the door bolt shut behind him. He's choosing this, she thought. Every second. He's choosing not to. She didn't know yet how much that choice would cost him. The convoy moved through the night toward the interior, away from the breach, away from the wreckage of Maria, toward a holding facility Dryast had heard whispered about, but never confirmed the location of. A converted fortress outside the inner districts, built decades ago, for a threat that had never materialized until now. Ilsa rode with the escort, not because she'd been ordered to, but because Drast had looked at her, once, and said, "Someone should be there who saw him choose not to kill us," and she hadn't been able to argue with that logic. 3 hours into the ride, the wagon carrying Broly slowed. It wasn't an ambush, not at first. It was worse, in its way, a scattering of refugees, still fleeing the breach zone days later, stumbling across the road in the dark, too exhausted and too desperate to clear the convoy's path fast enough. Yalden's soldiers shouted for them to move. Most did, one didn't. A boy, 7 or 8, frozen in the wagon lamp's glare, too terrified to run, his mother screaming his name from the tree line. The lead wagon didn't stop in time. Ilsa saw it happening, a half second before it did. The horses too close, the boy too still, the driver hauling uselessly at reins that wouldn't answer fast enough. She didn't see Broly move. Nobody did. One moment the reinforced wagon door was bolted shut. The next, it was in pieces on the road, and Broly was standing between the boy and 800 pounds of panicked horseflesh. One hand closed around the lead horse's bridle, hard enough to stop it dead in its tracks, gold flickering violent and bright at the edges of his hair before he, visibly, deliberately, breathed it back down to nothing. The boy stared up at him, too shocked to cry. Broly knelt, slow, non-threatening, until he was closer to the child's height, and said something too quiet for Ilsa to hear over the shouting that had already started around them. The shouting that mattered was Yaldan's. He's out. Weapons up. Subject is out of containment. He saved a child. Dreist snapped, already moving toward the scene, but Yaldan wasn't listening anymore. 40 crossbows swung toward a man kneeling in the road with a rescued child still trembling in front of him, and Ilsa understood, with sick clarity, exactly how fast this was about to go wrong. "Stand down," Dreist bellowed, but Yaldan's soldiers were watching their captain, not the garrison commander who had no authority over them, and Yaldan's face had gone hard and flat with the particular fear of someone who just watched a contained asset break its containment in under a second. "Fire on my order," Yaldan said. Broly rose, slowly, the boy already being pulled back toward his sobbing mother by Ilsa's own hands. She hadn't consciously decided to move, only found herself there, between the child and the raised crossbows, a decision made faster than thought. "I broke the door," Broly said, calm, hands open at his sides, "because your wagon was about to kill him. That's the only reason." "You don't get to decide when the containment breaks," Yaldan said. "That's the entire point of containment." "Captain," Dry started. "Fire." The bolts loosed. Ilsa flinched, expecting blood, expecting the night to end in a way that would haunt every soldier standing in that road for the rest of their lives. Broly didn't dodge. He didn't need to. He raised one forearm, almost lazily, and the bolts that struck him shattered against skin, like they'd hit tempered steel, clattering uselessly to the dirt road. He didn't so much as flinch. The silence that followed was total. "I told you," Broly said quietly, into that silence, "I wasn't going to hurt you." He looked around at the ring of soldiers, the shattered bolts, the still sobbing boy in his mother's arms. "I'm still not going to, but you should probably stop trying that." Yaldan's face, in the lamplight, cycled through something Ilsa had never seen on a military police captain before. Not just fear, but the specific vertigo of a woman realizing her entire chain of command had built its authority on an assumption of superior force, and that assumption had just been shattered as easily as those bolts. "Rebolt the wagon," Yaldan said finally, voice tight. "We continue to the facility." Broly looked at the broken door, at the boy, at the ring of soldiers who still hadn't lowered their weapons, even though every one of them now understood how meaningless those weapons were. Something in his face, that same weary patience, held, but Ilsa could see, now, how much effort it was taking to hold it. "I'll come," Broly said, "not because you can make me, because I want to understand this place before I decide anything." He glanced toward Dreist, the one person in this convoy who'd spoken to him like a person and not a specimen. "That's the only reason." He climbed back into the ruined wagon frame and sat, folding himself down into stillness once more, and the convoy resumed its crawl toward the interior fortress in a silence so heavy Ilsa could feel it pressing against her ribs. She rode the rest of the way with one thought looping, cold and insistent, through her mind. We just found out what happens when this world tries to force him, and he still chose to come anyway. She didn't know how many more times that choice would hold. She was beginning to suspect that somewhere above her, in rooms she'd never see, people were already deciding it didn't matter how many times he chose peace, only that he'd shown, undeniably, tonight, that he could choose otherwise. The fortress gates rose ahead of them in the dark, and behind those gates, Ilsa understood, waited people far less inclined than Dryast to give a monster the benefit of the doubt. People who had already, in their own minds, stopped seeing Broly as anything but a weapon that needed either a leash or a grave. The fortress had a name once, Karst Hold, older than the walls themselves according to the plaque rusting beside its gate. But nobody who worked there called it that anymore. Among the military police who staffed it, it was simply the cage, and Broly understood why within an hour of arriving. The cell wasn't a cell. It was a converted grain silo 40 feet across, its walls reinforced with iron plating salvaged from 3 different failed wall defense projects over the decades, built for a threat the police had spent years theorizing about and never actually seen until now. Broly stood in the center of it, looking up at the ring of narrow windows near the ceiling, too high to reach without effort, too small to matter if he wanted through them, and understood, with the particular clarity of someone who'd worn far worse cages, exactly what this space was for. It wasn't built to hold him. Nothing here could hold him, and everyone from Yalden down to the newest recruit standing guard outside seemed to understand that. It was built to make him feel held, a formality, a ritual of control performed for an audience that needed to believe control was possible. He sat down in the center of the silo floor and waited, because waiting cost him nothing, and because some quiet, patient part of him, the part that had survived worse worlds than this one, still believed that patience might be rewarded with understanding if he gave it enough time. Ilsa found her way to the observation platform 2 days later, against explicit orders, trading a favor with a guard she'd served alongside during the breach for 10 unsanctioned minutes at the narrow viewing slit above the silo. Broly looked up before she'd made a sound. "You're the one who caught the boy," he said, after I broke the door. "Ilsa," she said. "Ilsa Braun." Broly. A faint, tired, almost smile. "You already knew that." She crouched at the slit, close enough now to see the details the fortress's dim lighting had hidden. The way exhaustion sat on him differently than it did on a soldier, less a depletion of strength than a wearing down of patience. 2 days in this cage, and he hadn't broken a single plate of that reinforced iron. 2 days of a world that had shown him nothing but fear and force, and he was still choosing stillness. "They're arguing about you," she said, because it felt cruel not to tell him. "Upstairs, half the command wants to use you against the Titans past the coast. The other half wants you dead before anyone else gets the idea. And what do you want?" The question caught her off guard the same way it had caught Dryast off guard 3 nights ago. She thought about the boy in the road, about the bolts shattering harmlessly against his forearm, about the grief on his face when he'd asked, that first night, whether anyone had died inside the fallen wall. "I want to know what would make you angry enough to stop holding back," she said honestly. "Because I think that's the only question that actually matters right now. Everyone upstairs is asking whether you're a weapon. Nobody's asking what happens if they make you one." Something shifted behind Broly's eyes. Not anger, not yet, but the shadow of a memory he clearly didn't want to revisit. "Where I'm from," he said slowly, "there were people who used me. My whole life, before I understood what I was, someone else decided what I was for." His jaw tightened, the faintest thread of gold flickering at his hairline before he steadied it. "It didn't end well for them. It didn't end well for me either. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got." He met her eyes through the narrow slit, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something harder underneath the patience. Not menace, but warning. "I don't want to hurt anyone here. I've had enough of hurting people because someone decided that's what I was for. But if this place tries to make that choice for me again..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ilsa sat with that answer a long moment, the fortress cold seeping up through the stone beneath her. "Then we need to make sure nobody upstairs makes that choice," she said finally. "You can't stop them," Broly said, not unkindly. You're one soldier. I know. She stood, brushing dust from her knees, some new resolve settling into her spine that hadn't been there 3 nights ago in the crater. But Draist isn't, and Draist listens to me. She found Draist in the fortress's cramped command office, staring at a report that had arrived that morning from the interior capital. His cigarette long since burned to ash between 2 fingers he seemed to have forgotten were holding it. They've made a decision, he said, before she could speak, sliding the paper across the desk. Command wants a demonstration. Controlled conditions, MP oversight, a captured Titan brought in from the coast for the purpose. They want to see exactly what he can do before deciding whether he's an asset or a liability. Ilsa scanned the orders, her stomach tightening with every line. That's not a demonstration. That's bait. They want to provoke him and watch what happens. I know what it is. Draist's voice was flat, exhausted. I said as much in the room. Nobody above my rank particularly cared what I thought. He told me, Ilsa said, that the only thing that's ever made him lose control was people deciding what he was for. Sir, if they push him into a demonstration meant to provoke, then we find out exactly how bad the thing in that silo can get. Draist finished, grim. And 100 soldiers standing around a Colosseum ring get to be the ones who find out first. He stood, pushing back from the desk, and for a moment, Ilsa saw something in his face that looked almost like the fear she'd carried since the crater. Not fear of Broly, but fear of what the people giving these orders were about to unleash by refusing to simply listen. The demonstration's tomorrow, Draist said. Captain Yaldan's running point. I've been ordered to assist. He met her eyes. I want you there, not because I think you can stop it, because I think, if it goes the way I'm afraid it's going to go, somebody in that Colosseum needs to remember he chose peace first, every single time, right up until they didn't let him choose anymore. The Colosseum was an old training yard on the fortress grounds, ringed with reinforced stands built for exactly this kind of spectacle, and by the time Broly was led out into its center the next morning, unchained, because chains had proven pointless, but flanked by 40 armed soldiers who clearly believed proximity was its own kind of leash. The stands were packed with officers from 3 divisions, all of them come to watch a monster prove itself. The captured Titan was released from a transport cage on the yard's far end, an ordinary 4-meter class, mindless and shambling, drawn by instinct toward the largest cluster of warm bodies in sight, which happened to be the command officials seated in the lowest tier of stands. Ilsa watched Broly's face as the Titan lurched toward the crowd, watched him do the math a half-second before anyone else did. This wasn't a demonstration of his power, it was a test of his priorities, dressed up as one. Would he let the Titan reach the officials who'd caged him to prove he was harmless? Or would he act and hand Yaldan's faction exactly the uncontrolled asset narrative they'd been building toward all along? He didn't hesitate. He crossed the yard in a blur of gold that left afterimages burned into every witness's vision, closed one hand around the Titan's ankle mid-stride, and threw it. Not at the crowd, not through the stands, but straight up and out, over the fortress's outer wall entirely. A 15-ton body arcing through open sky to crash somewhere in the empty fields beyond, where it would trouble no one at all. The yard went silent. 40 soldiers stood with weapons half raised, uncertain what they'd just watched, a demonstration of restraint so absolute it left the entire premise of the test in ruins. Yaldan, in the stands, was the first to find her voice. "That's not containment," she said, loud enough to carry. "That's a weapon that decided, on its own, what to do with lethal force. That's worse. That's a man who just saved every person in this yard," Dry snapped back, "and you're calling it a threat because he didn't wait for your permission first." Broly stood in the center of the yard, breathing hard, gold still crackling faintly at the edges of his hair, and looked up at the stands, at the officials who'd engineered this entire spectacle to force his hand, and had gotten, instead, an answer they clearly hadn't wanted. "I told you," he said, into the ringing silence, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." His eyes swept the stands, found Yalden specifically. "But I'm done proving that to people who've already decided what I am before I open my mouth." He didn't attack. He didn't run. He simply stood there, radiating a patience that was visibly, finally, beginning to fray at its edges. And every soldier in that Colosseum understood, in that moment, that they had just watched the absolute sealing of Broly's restraint, and that whatever came next depended entirely on whether this world chose to keep testing it. That night, Dreist found Ilsa on the fortress wall, staring out at the dark fields where the discarded Titan had landed, its body already starting to steam and dissolve in the moonlight. "Commands convening at dawn," he said quietly. "Yalden's pushing for full containment protocol. Heavier restraints, round-the-clock provocation testing, the works. There's a faction that wants to bring him east, use him against the coastline Titans directly. No more testing required." He exhaled, long and tired. "And there's a smaller faction, mine included, that thinks continuing to treat him like a specimen is the fastest way to lose whatever goodwill got us this far. What happens if Yalden wins the argument?" Dreist didn't answer right away. Below them, in the silo that wasn't built to hold him, but was meant to make him feel held, Broly sat exactly where he'd sat for 3 days. Exactly as patient, exactly as contained. For now. "Then tomorrow," Dreist said finally, "we find out what this world looks like when it finally succeeds at making Broly someone else's weapon. And I don't think any of us are ready for what that costs." Above them, clouds shifted, and for just a moment, moonlight caught the narrow silo windows, and something within them flickered, faint, gold, and entirely involuntary. Dawn came gray and cold, and with it, the order Dreist had been dreading since the Colosseum: full transfer authorization. Broly was to be moved east, under heavy MP escort, toward the coastal defense line, not as a prisoner anymore, but as a weapon requisitioned for use against the Titan concentrations, still pressing the shattered remains of Wall Maria's outer perimeter. Yalden's faction had won, but not cleanly. The order came with a rider clause Dreist recognized immediately for what it was: a contingency. If the asset showed further signs of uncontrolled independent action, lethal containment was authorized. They were sending him to fight, and they were sending him with a leash disguised as a battle order, ready to be used the moment he stopped being convenient. Dreist read the order twice in the command office, then folded it once, the way he'd folded the first one 4 nights ago, and walked down to the silo himself instead of sending a runner. Broly was already standing when Dreist arrived, as if he'd known before the door opened. Perhaps he had. Dreist had stopped being surprised by what this man seemed to sense. "They're moving me," Broly said. "Not a question. East. Coastal line. They want you fighting Titans by tomorrow evening." Dreist held up the order, let Broly read the rider clause himself, "And they've written themselves permission to kill you the moment you stop being useful to them." Broly read it in silence, and Dreist watched something settle in his face. Not surprise, not even real anger. Recognition. The particular, exhausted recognition of a man who'd seen this exact shape of betrayal before, in another world, wearing different uniforms. "I know this pattern," Broly said quietly. "Someone finds a use for you. They call it partnership, right up until the moment it isn't convenient anymore." He looked up at Dreist. "You already know I won't go quietly into that." "I know." Dreist met his eyes. "I'm not here to make you. I'm here because I think there's a difference between fighting for people and fighting because they've cornered you into it, and I'd rather you get the choice while there's still a choice to give." Ilsa arrived as the transfer column was forming in the fortress yard. 6 wagons, 60 soldiers, Yalden herself at the head of the formation, with the particular stiff satisfaction of an officer who believed she'd finally won. She caught Dreist's eye across the yard, and knew, from his face alone, that whatever was about to happen hadn't been decided by command anymore. Broly walked out into the yard under his own power, unescorted in any meaningful sense, and stopped in the center of the formation, and every soldier present felt the air change. "I'll go east," Broly said, his voice carrying flat and clear across the yard. "I'll fight the Titans threatening your people, because innocent people are dying, and I have the strength to stop it, and that's reason enough on its own." He looked at Yalden directly. "Not because of the clause you attach to this order. Not because you think you can end me the moment I'm inconvenient." Yalden's jaw tightened. "That clause exists for the safety of—" "It exists," Broly cut in, quiet and absolute, "because you've never once, in 4 days, stopped being afraid of what I could do to you. And you've never once asked what I actually wanted to do." He let that sit. Let it land on every soldier in the yard, on Dreist, on Ilsa, watching from the wall above. "I'm not going to make you regret that fear. I'm going to prove it wrong instead. But that clause dies here, today, or I don't take one more step toward your coastline." The yard held its breath. Yalden looked at the order in her hand, at the man who'd shattered 40 crossbow bolts against his own forearm without flinching, and then thrown a live titan clear over a fortress wall rather than let it reach a crowd, and understood, perhaps for the first time, that she had never actually held the power to enforce that clause. She'd simply been betting he wouldn't call the bluff. He'd called it, "Strike the rider clause," Yalden said finally, tight, to the aide beside her. "Full requisition, standard terms only." It wasn't trust. Dryas knew that. Watching from the yard's edge, knew Yalden's faction would be back within the week, with some other formality, dressed up as necessity. But it was, for the first time in 4 days, a decision made because Broly had demanded it as a person, and not because a stronger force had made it for him. The coastal fighting, when it came, was everything the reports would later struggle to properly describe. Broly moved through the Titan concentrations, pressing the eastern perimeter like something the wall's entire military doctrine had never accounted for. Not with ODM gear, not with blades aimed at fragile napes, but with raw, overwhelming force applied with a precision that surprised even the soldiers who'd spent 4 days convinced they understood what he was capable of. He didn't kill indiscriminately. He moved between mindless titans and fleeing refugee columns with a deliberate economy, placing himself as a wall between the two, over and over, until the coastal line that had been buckling for 3 days held instead, and then began, slowly, to push the Titan pressure back. Ilsa fought alongside the Garrison line that evening and watched, between engagements, as Broly caught a 9-meter class mid-lunge toward a collapsed farmhouse where a Garrison medic team had been trapped, tore it apart with his bare hands in under 2 seconds, and then knelt, gently, impossibly gently for something built the way he was, to pull the medics free from the wreckage one at a time, checking each of them for injury before he moved on to the next threat. She thought about the boy in the road, about the choice, made over and over, never once taken from him again. By the time the sun set fully on the coastal line, the Titan pressure that had threatened to overrun 3 separate Garrison positions had broken entirely, and for the first time since Wall Maria fell, soldiers who'd spent 4 days grieving found themselves, however briefly, simply relieved. Dreist found Broly afterward, alone at the edge of the reclaimed line, looking east toward a horizon that held nothing familiar. No home, no brother, no world he recognized. "You did good work today," Dreist said, settling beside him, exhaustion and something like respect both plain in his voice. "I did what I would have done anywhere," Broly said. "Protected people who couldn't protect themselves. That part's never been complicated for me." He was quiet a moment. "The complicated part's always been everyone else deciding what that makes me. And what do you think it makes you? Here, in this world." Broly considered the question with the same weight he seemed to give everything. No rush, no performance, just honest consideration. "Someone who's earned the right to choose what he fights for," he said finally, instead of having it chosen for him. He glanced at Dreist, That's all I've ever actually wanted. Not command, not a leash with a longer chain. Just that. Dreist nodded slowly, and for a long moment, the two of them simply watched the last of the daylight fade over a coastline that had, against every likelihood, held. For what it's worth, Dreist said eventually, you've got at least one commander who's not interested in reattaching that clause. I know. A faint, tired, almost smile. The first genuine one Dreist had seen from him. That's why I stayed. The war for the walls was far from over. Somewhere behind them, Yaldan's faction would regroup, would draft new formalities dressed as necessity, would spend months trying to find some fresh angle from which to make Broly someone else's weapon again. Somewhere ahead, Titans still pressed the crumbling perimeter, and refugees still filed east in columns that never seemed to end, and the world Broly had fallen into remained every bit as broken as the one he'd left behind. But on that coastline, in the fading light, a boy who'd nearly died under a wagon's wheels was already telling his mother, for the third time that night, about the golden giant who'd caught the horse with one hand. A medic team walked away from a collapsed farmhouse alive because someone had chosen, gently and deliberately, to save them instead of simply moving past. And a garrison commander who'd learned 4 nights ago never to assume the worst about something impossible sat beside that same impossible thing now, in comfortable silence, 2 tired men watching a horizon neither of them fully understood. Broly hadn't asked for this world. He hadn't asked for its walls, its titans, its fear-soaked politics, or the particular grief of watching the same old pattern, use him, fear him, cage him, try to repeat itself in a language he'd never heard before he arrived. But he'd found, in the space of 4 impossible days, exactly what he'd always looked for and rarely been given: the simple, stubborn right to choose. He'd chosen mercy at a crater's edge. He'd chosen restraint against 40 crossbows. He'd chosen a wall, not a crowd, for a hurled titan to land against. And now, however briefly, he'd chosen this: a coastline held, a boy safe, a commander who saw a person before he saw a weapon. Whatever this world decided to call him next, asset, monster, ally, threat, Broly already knew, with the same quiet certainty that had carried him through every version of every world he'd ever fought in, exactly who he was. He was someone who protected the people who couldn't protect themselves. Everything else was just noise the world hadn't learned to stop making yet.